October 14th, 1933. 02:14 a.m. Red's 24-hour diner, outskirts of Joplin, Missouri. The smell of burnt chicory and cheap floor wax hangs heavy in the air. Outside, the rain is a relentless grey curtain, turning the gravel parking lot into a soup of mud and oil. Inside, the neon sign flickers, a rhythmic buzz snap, casting a sickly blue light over a half-eaten plate of ham and eggs. Then the sound of a fist hitting bone, a wet, sickening thud. An elderly man, perhaps 70, collapses against the jukebox. His glasses skitter across the linoleum, one lens cracked. Standing over him is a man twice his size, wearing a grease-stained leather jacket and a sneer. The big man hadn't liked the way the old-timer looked at him. He didn't like that the old man's hand shook when he poured his sugar. "Watch where you're leaking, old man," the brute growls, wiping a splash of coffee from his sleeve. The diner is dead silent. The waitress, a girl no older than 19 named Mary, freezes with a glass pot in her hand. Her knuckles are white. But in the corner booth, shadowed and smelling of expensive tobacco and gunpowder, two figures don't move. They are eating peach pie. The man is slight, with slicked-back hair and eyes that look like they've seen the bottom of a grave. The woman has a beret tilted low over one eye, a silk scarf around her neck, and a Browning automatic rifle leaning casually against the vinyl seat. To the world, they are Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. To the law, they are the most wanted ghosts in America. To the bully in the diner, they are just two more witnesses. Clyde slowly sets his fork down. He doesn't look at the bully. He looks at the old man's broken glasses. In the underworld, there is a hierarchy. There are predators, and there are scavengers. Clyde Barrow hated scavengers. "You should apologize to the gentleman," Clyde says. His voice is a low rasp, barely audible over the rain. The bully turns, grinning, unaware that he just stepped onto a landmine. To understand how the most famous outlaws in history ended up defending a stranger in a roadside diner, we have to look at the 3 days leading up to this moment, a trail of blood, ego, and a fatal miscalculation by the Chicago Syndicate. 3 days earlier. October 11th, 1933. 11 a.m. A warehouse in East St. Louis. The air was thick with the scent of river rot and diesel. Clyde Barrow was never meant to cross paths with the outfit. He was a bank robber, a gas station stick-up artist, a rural legend. But the Depression had made the borders of crime porous. The big city mobs were moving south, looking for new territories to wash their bootleg money. Frank the Enforcer. Nitti had sent a small crew down to Missouri to establish a distribution hub. They were led by a man named Vincent the Vulture Moretti, a mid-level soldier with a high-level appetite for cruelty. Moretti didn't care for the hillbilly bandits who were drawing too much heat from the feds. "The Barrow gang is a liability," Moretti told his men, flicking an ash onto a crate of illegal gin. "They rob a bank, and 50 G-men show up in my backyard. We need to clip them, or we need to own them." Meanwhile, Bonnie and Clyde were hiding out in a rented apartment, the walls thin enough to hear the neighbors breathing. Bonnie was writing "The Trail's End" in a notebook, her fingers stained with ink. She felt the noose tightening. The Texas Rangers were hunting them. The FBI was coordinating. And now whispers were reaching Clyde that the Chicago boys were looking for him. Clyde wasn't a businessman. He was a creature of impulse and loyalty. When one of his scouts, a nervous kid named Henry, told him that Moretti's men had roughed up Clyde's cousin just to send a message, the V5 Ford engine in Clyde's soul began to roar. "They think because they wear silk suits, they own the dirt," Clyde whispered to Bonnie. He didn't know that Moretti had already put a price on his head, not for the law, but for the pride of the syndicate. The trap was set. But the Chicago mob forgot one thing. A cornered animal doesn't care about the rules of the syndicate. And the Barrow gang was very, very cornered. October 12th, 1933. 04:30 p.m. Highway 66, north of Springfield. The sound of a Ford V8 at full throttle is a symphony of mechanical aggression. Clyde was at the wheel, his hands light on the rim. In the rearview mirror, 2 black Buicks were gaining. These weren't police cars. There were no sirens. Just the glint of Thompson submachine guns protruding from the windows. "Clyde, they're closing in," Bonnie shouted, bracing herself against the dashboard. She reached into the floorboard and pulled out a cut-down Remington shotgun, the Whippet gun. Moretti's men weren't trying to arrest them. They were trying to erase them. A burst of gunfire shattered the Ford's rear window, glass spraying like diamonds across the back seat. Clyde didn't panic. He knew these roads better than his own reflection. He knew where the asphalt turned to gravel, and where the gravel turned to washboard ruts that would snap the axle of a heavy Buick. He yanked the wheel, sending the Ford into a screaming drift down a narrow logging trail. The first Buick tried to follow, hit a ditch and flipped. It tumbled 3 times, a twisted heap of metal and screaming men. The second Buick skidded to a halt, the shooters jumping out to spray the woods with lead. But Clyde was already gone. He circled back through a creek bed, the water splashing over the running boards. He wasn't running away. He was repositioning. He parked behind a dense thicket of oaks and waited. "Give me the bar," he said calmly. When the remaining mobsters walked past his hiding spot, Clyde didn't give them a chance to surrender. He opened fire. The sheer power of the .30-06 rounds shredded the trees and the men behind them. It wasn't a gunfight. It was an execution. Clyde walked over to the one survivor, a man bleeding out in the dirt. He leaned down, the smell of cordite heavy on his breath. "Tell Moretti," Clyde hissed, "that the next time he wants to talk, he should come himself." Clyde had won the skirmish, but he had declared war on an empire, and that empire had eyes everywhere, even in the smallest, quietest diners on the road to Joplin. October 13th, 1933. 10 p.m., a hidden campsite near Shoal Creek. The fire was small, barely a flicker against the massive Missouri trees. Bonnie was cleaning a wound on Clyde's shoulder where a shard of glass had embedded itself. The tension between them was electric, a mix of adrenaline and the creeping realization that the end was coming. "We should go to Mexico, Clyde," Bonnie whispered. "Leave the banks, leave the guns, just disappear." Clyde looked at her, his eyes soft for the only time that day. "People like us don't disappear, Bonnie. We just fade out. Besides, I ain't letting some Chicago greaseball think he ran us out of our own country." They were tired. They were hungry. They hadn't had a hot meal in 48 hours. The hunger is what led them to Red's diner. It was a mistake. In their world, comfort was a trap. While they sat by the fire, Moretti was in a hotel room in Joplin, screaming into a telephone. He had lost 6 men and 2 cars. The syndicate was demanding results. Moretti knew the Barrow gang's habits. He knew they stayed close to the backroads. He began calling every connected business owner in the tri-state area. "Keep an eye out for a gray Ford with Texas plates and a smashed rear window," Moretti ordered. "If they show up, you don't call the cops. You call me." Red, the owner of the 24-hour diner, was a man who owed the mob $500 in gambling debts. When the gray Ford pulled into his lot at 2 a.m., Red felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He looked at the couple, the thin man with the limp, the pretty girl with the hard eyes, and he reached for the phone under the counter. Bonnie and Clyde walked into the diner looking for peace. Instead, they walked into a slaughterhouse where they were the intended livestock, back to the present. October 14th, 1933. 02:16 a.m., Red's diner. The big man, whose name was Buck, didn't like being told what to do, especially not by a scrawny kid in a dusty suit. He left the elderly man bleeding on the floor and took 3 heavy steps toward Clyde's booth. "What did you say to me, punk?" Buck asked, his shadow looming over their pie. Bonnie didn't even look up. She took a sip of her water. "He said you should apologize. It's a manners thing. You wouldn't understand." Buck laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're a feisty little thing. Maybe after I break your boyfriend's jaw, you and me can—" He never finished the sentence. Clyde didn't stand up. He just moved his right hand. In a flash of silver, a Colt .45 was pressed firmly against Buck's kneecap under the table. "The old man has a name," Clyde said, his voice dropping to a predatory whisper. "And you just broke his glasses. Those cost money. Money he probably doesn't have because of people like you." The atmosphere in the diner shifted. The vulture, Moretti, hadn't arrived yet, but the tension was already at a breaking point. Red, the owner, was shaking so hard he dropped a ceramic mug. the sound echoing like a gunshot. I don't want no trouble, Buck stammered, finally seeing the cold, dead vacuum in Clyde's eyes. This wasn't a bar fighter. This was a killer. Too late for that, Clyde said. Pick him up, apologize, then give him every cent in your wallet. As Buck began to comply, his hands trembling, the bells above the diner door jingled. The cold October wind rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and wet wool. 3 men in long overcoats stepped inside. In the center was Vincent Moretti. The bully was no longer the most dangerous person in the room. The syndicate had arrived, and the diner was about to become a tomb. 2:20 a.m. Red's diner. Moretti took in the scene. The bully cowering, the old man sobbing, and the 2 most wanted outlaws in America sitting in the corner booth like royalty. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Clyde Barrow, Moretti said, unbuttoning his coat to reveal a shoulder holster. You're a hard man to find, and an even harder man to kill, apparently. Clyde didn't move the gun from under the table. Moretti, you're a long way from the city. Hope you brought a map for the way back. It gets dark in the woods. Bonnie slid her hand toward the bar. Her movements were fluid, practiced. She was the loader, the strategist, the heart of the fire. I don't want the girl, Moretti said, gesturing to his 2 gunmen to fan out. I just want the Ford and the reputation. You hand over the keys and walk out of here. Maybe you live another week. If not, well, Red here needs the floor mopped anyway. Red retreated to the kitchen, his face pale. The elderly man was still on the floor, caught in the crossfire of 2 different kinds of evil. Clyde looked at the old man. He saw his own father in those tired, frightened eyes. A man worked to the bone by a system that didn't care if he lived or died. The old man goes first, Clyde said. He walks out, he gets in his car, and he leaves. Then we talk. Moretti chuckled. Since when did you become a saint, Clyde? You've killed deputies, you've robbed widows. I never hit a man who couldn't hit back, Clyde snapped. That's the difference between a man and a vulture. Moretti signaled his men. They leveled their Thompsons. The standoff was a heartbeat away from a bloodbath, but Clyde had a trick up his sleeve that the city boys hadn't accounted for. 2:22 a.m. Red's diner. The moment sonoro wasn't a gunshot. It was the whistle of a train in the distance. The tracks ran just 50 yards behind the diner. The floor began to vibrate, a low hum that shook the salt shakers. Clyde used the vibration as his cue. Now, he barked. Bonnie didn't just grab the bar, she kicked the table over, creating a momentary shield. Clyde fired through the wood, the 45 rounds catching one of Moretti's gunmen in the chest. The diner erupted. Plate glass windows shattered as Moretti's men returned fire, the rat-tat-tat of the Thompsons shredding the vinyl booths. Stuffing flew through the air like snow. Clyde grabbed the elderly man by the collar and dragged him behind the heavy steel counter. Stay down. Don't move until I tell you. Bonnie was a demon. She stood up, the bar braced against her hip, and unleashed a torrent of lead that cut through the diner's counter, the pie cases, and the coffee urns. Hot coffee sprayed everywhere, mixing with the blood and the gunpowder smoke. Moretti dove behind the jukebox, swearing. He had expected a couple of hicks with revolvers. He hadn't expected a military-grade assault. Kill them, Moretti screamed. I don't care about the girl. Kill them both. One of the mobsters tried to flank them by the kitchen door. Clyde saw him in the reflection of a toaster. He leaned out and fired 3 times. The man slumped into the industrial dishwasher, his blood turning the soapy water pink. But they were pinned. Moretti had the exit blocked, and more headlights were pulling into the lot. The backup had arrived. Clyde, we're running low, Bonnie shouted over the roar of the passing train. They were out of options, out of ammo, and almost out of time. So 2:28 a.m., Red's diner. The train was passing now, a deafening roar that drowned out the screams and the gunfire. The diner was a wreck. The neon sign was out. The only light came from the flickering flames of a grease fire in the kitchen. Clyde looked at the old man. The man was holding his broken glasses, his eyes wide with terror. Listen to me, Clyde whispered. When I start shooting, you run for the back door. There's a ditch. Crawl through it until you hit the woods. Don't look back. Why are you doing this? The old man stammered. Clyde gave a grim smile. Because I'm a Barrow, and Barrows don't like bullies. Clyde stood up, fully exposing himself. He had 2 pistols now. He began walking toward Moretti's position, firing with rhythmic precision. He wasn't aiming to kill anymore, he was aiming to suppress. He was a moving target, drawing every ounce of Moretti's hate and lead toward himself. "Run!" Bonnie screamed at the old man. The elder scrambled toward the back, disappearing into the dark rain. Moretti saw the movement and tried to pivot, but Bonnie stitched a line of bullets across the top of the jukebox, forcing him to duck. Clyde reached the front door, his suit jacket shredded by near misses. He kicked the door open and sprinted for the Ford. He needed to get the engine started. He needed to give Bonnie a way out. But as he reached the car, a bullet caught him in the thigh. He went down hard in the mud. "Clyde!" Bonnie's scream pierced through the roar of the train. She didn't hesitate. She ran out into the open, ignoring the bullets whizzing past her ears. She grabbed Clyde by the shoulders and hauled him toward the driver's side. They were both in the line of sight. Moretti stepped out of the diner, his face twisted in a mask of triumph. He raised his handgun, aiming right at Bonnie's head. 02:32 a.m., the parking lot. Moretti never got the shot off. From the darkness of the woods, a single rifle shot rang out. It wasn't from Bonnie or Clyde. It was the old man. He had found a hunting rifle in the trunk of his old Chevy, and for a brief moment, the trembling in his hands had stopped. The bullet struck the gravel at Moretti's feet, spraying him with stone and dirt. It was enough of a distraction. Clyde flopped into the driver's seat, his leg a mask of pain. He slammed the Ford into gear. Bonnie dived into the passenger side as the car roared to life, the tires spinning and throwing a wall of mud over Moretti. "You're dead, Barrow," Moretti screamed into the night. "The syndicate never forgets." As the Ford disappeared into the rain, heading toward the back roads of Kansas, the diner fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant fading rhythm of the train. Red stepped out onto the porch, looking at the destruction. His business was gone. His debt was likely doubled, but he was alive. The old man walked out of the woods carrying his rifle. He looked at the shattered diner, then down at his broken glasses. He reached into his pocket and found a wad of cash that Clyde had jammed there when he dragged him behind the counter. It was $300, enough for a new car, a new house, and 1,000 pairs of glasses. Attached to the money was a small scrap of paper with a poem Bonnie had started in the booth. It ended with a new line. "The world may call us killers, and maybe that's the truth, but we never broke a heart that didn't have a tooth." The news of the diner massacre hit the papers the next morning. But the story that traveled through the speakeasies and the slums wasn't about the robbery. It was about the time the most dangerous couple in America fought a war for a man who had nothing. October 15th, 1933. 06:01 a.m., a farmhouse in Oklahoma. Clyde sat on the porch, his leg bandaged with a torn bedsheet. Bonnie was inside making coffee. The sun was beginning to rise, a pale, cold yellow on the horizon. They knew the clock was ticking. The syndicate would be coming. The law would be coming. Every act of heroism just added another layer to the legend, and every layer of the legend made them a bigger target. "Was it worth it?" Bonnie asked, leaning against the doorframe. Clyde looked at his hands. They were stained with grease, blood, and the ink from Bonnie's pen. He thought about the old man. He thought about the look on Buck's face when he realized that power isn't about size. It's about the will to use it. "He got away, didn't he?" Clyde asked. "He did. Then it was worth it." In the criminal world, reputation is the only currency that matters. Bonnie and Clyde were broke, bleeding, and hunted, but in every dive bar from St. Louis to Dallas, people were talking. They were talking about the outlaws who took on the Chicago mob for a stranger's dignity. They had become more than bank robbers. They had become folk heroes, and that, more than any bullet, is what would eventually lead them to that lonely road in Gippsland, Louisiana. Because a legend is a heavy thing to carry, and eventually it crushes the person underneath. Clyde lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the morning air. "We better move, Bonnie. I can hear the engines coming." The Ford V8 roared to life one more time. Bonnie and Clyde's life was a cycle of violence and desperation, but moments like these remind us that even in the darkest hearts, there are lines that won't be crossed. They lived by a code that the modern world has forgotten, a code written in lead and loyalty. What do you think? Was Clyde right to risk everything for a stranger, or was his ego the real killer in that diner? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of history.